Yo, how's it going everybody? It's me, Arctic. Today's video, we're going to be going over a complete build guide for Arataki Itto. Now basically what I'm going to be talking about is the best weapon choices for him, and also the best artifact choice for him as well. And basically we're going to be just talking about his kit a little bit, and what I think is going to kind of be the best to use on Arataki Itto. So a few things to keep in mind when actually building Itto. One of these being that he does scale with crit rate on his ascension. So basically you're going to want to run like a crit damage hat or something like that instead of like a crit rate one, just because he's already going to have enough crit rate to basically balance out your build in general. The thing to keep in mind is that his ultimate does convert his defense into actual attack, and that's at about 100% of your defense goes into an attack whenever you get that to talent level 10. But basically the significance of that is because you can kind of balance out your defense percent and also your attack percent that you're building on Arataki Itto. Like, attack percent isn't as valuable on him, although he does have a pretty high base attack at 227, so that's basically going to allow you to use attack percent. Like, attack percent is still usable on him, it's just that that's not what we're necessarily focusing on. And also another thing to keep in mind is that his passives basically center around like defense being used to boost out his actual like charge attack damage, and his charge attacks are special and they'll do like a big slash. Okay, so for the best weapon choices for Arataki Itto, we've got several options that are viable, and several options that aren't really that viable at all. I have made an actual weapons tier list for him in the past, and that's not necessarily considering like damage completely potential. Like, definitely there are options that are going to be better for damage whenever you get to higher refinements. I was just basically looking at which ones are going to be best for Arataki Itto's kit in general. Blackcliff Slasher is an excellent option to use on Arataki Itto, partially because it does come with a crit damage ascension, and he does have a crit rate ascension, so it basically is going to balance out your build quite a bit. But then the passive on this is actually pretty decent, especially if you have like Blackcliff Slasher at like R5 or something. You're going to be gaining a lot of attack percent from this after you're killing enemies, and if you are planning on actually using Arataki Itto, you're probably going to be using him as a main DPS for actually defeating enemies and so forth. So you're going to be able to get these stacks relatively easy, and they do last for 30 seconds, and they have individual durations, so it's pretty good passive. Spine is an excellent option for Arataki Itto, and now it does have the crit rate ascension, but basically you're still going to want to run on like a crit damage hat or something like that, but this is basically going to make it to where like your crit rate is pretty much set, you know. But then what makes this weapon really good is that its passive right here gives you like a damage bonus, and so basically if you have this weapon at like R5, I think it's like very close to out damaging like a basically his specific best in slot weapon at R1, I'm pretty sure, something like that. But basically this one's the best out of the 4 stars if you are going for just damage potential. And Serpent Spine actually does out DPS White Blind if you have like both of them at R5. So basically Serpent Spine is the better option, but White Blind is still a pretty good option if you are like free to play, or you are going to be using Arataki Itto with like a defense weapon like this, because this is the only defense weapon really for him. And this weapon's not that bad either. You get some attack and defense, and since they did buff his like base defense and base attack, this weapon's a little bit better than it was in the past, so I would be surprised to see if it actually gets a little bit closer to Serpent Spine. I know that people haven't done like re-damage calculations since he actually did get those buffs. Pride is a decent option on Arataki Itto as well, and the reason behind this is because if you are using him as your main DPS, you're going to want to have your burst up pretty much constantly. This is kind of similar to using like a Skyward Spine on your actual Zhao, but basically this one gives you like a damage boost of 8%, and then after you cast your Elemental Burst, your normal and charge attacks are going to do this extra slash damage right here, 8 Vacuum Blades. And this one does have a very high base attack, so it's going to be very nice, especially if you are going to be running a little bit of like attack percent on your Arataki Itto. Because you're basically, there's just no doubt about it, you're going to have some attack percent from some other stuff. I've seen a lot of people being like, oh yeah, don't use Wolf's Gravestone, it's just way worse than like a some of these other weapons. But since he did get that base attack boost increase, and since Wolf's Gravestone is such a good weapon, I think it's going to actually balance out quite a bit, especially if you make sure that you are using like a defense percentage on your timepiece, something like that. But yeah, this one just gives you a ton of attack percent, and like attack percent is still going to be good on him. I would see like basically the point of using a Wolf's Gravestone over like a White Blind would end up being that you get more attack percent, and that's basically going to make it to where, like, for example, like if your Arataki Itto has, like, let's say 800 base attack, and you got that attack percent, and at base, with just Wolf's Gravestone and his base attack, you would be at like 1,500, 1,800 range, kind of, in terms of your base attack. Why that is significant is because then, whenever you do cast your burst, that's basically going to convert it and add it on top of that attack percent that you already have. So it kind of, there's a certain point where it does actually boost out the amount of attack percent or attack that you actually get for your Arataki Itto, and at that point it's still pretty good. But basically, I would still make sure that you have enough defense percent, and if you do have like a Serpent Spine, I think Serpent Spine is still probably a better choice than Wolf's Gravestone, but Wolf's Gravestone is still a very viable option. Same concept with Unforged, although I think Unforged is probably a little bit better if you do have this at like higher refinements, and you are planning on using Arataki Itto as like your absolute main DPS, where like he's just on the field constantly and going to be constantly shielded, and this is going to make him a little bit more tanky with that extra shield strength too, so that's an added bonus. Best in slot weapon, Redhorn Stone Thresher. This one is actually going to definitely be his best in slot in terms of actual damage and damage potential, and so this one does have a little bit of a lower base attack, but it does have a very high crit damage ascension, and its passive is going to be really good on Arataki Itto as well. It gives you like 28% defense, and then your normal and charge attack damage is going to be increased by 40% of your defense. And if you are planning on using a bunch of defense on Arataki Itto anyway, it really starts totaling out quite a bit. 542 base attack at level 90 and 88 crit damage, so it's definitely a lot. Okay, now in terms of artifact sets that we have to use for Arataki Itto, there's only really a few that kind of stand out. One of them being Gladiator's Finale. The 4-piece of this can be pretty decent if you are just going for like normal attack damage with your Arataki Itto, but this doesn't boost like your charge attacks at all, so it's a little bit not as good. But if you do have a very good base stats on like a 4-piece of this, I would still consider it as an option. Petra set, the 2-piece of this is really good for Arataki Itto. If you are planning on using this with like 2-piece of this and then like 2-piece Noblesse, something like that, it can be pretty good if that's like a pre-farm kind of set. But there is one set that's actually probably his best in slot, that there's just no question that that's what you want as your end game set for him. Heart of Depth is actually a pretty decent option compared to Shimenawa's set, because he does actually rely on his burst quite a bit. So Heart of Depth, if you are going for that extra charge attack damage, normal and charge attack damage, this one actually might be a pretty decent option to use. But Shimenawa is like the highest damage potential, I would say, for Arataki Itto in terms of the sets that we currently have in the game right now, just because of this. But it does cost the extra 15% energy, so you probably are going to want to use like a character like Raiden Shogun, something like that, or some other characters, or like a lot of Geo batteries like Albedo and Zhongli, basically to get you those particles so you can actually keep good uptime with this set. But if you do have like a full ult or something, or you are casting this, yeah, it could potentially work. Although, like, the reason that Xiao can use this versus Arataki Itto, I feel, is because Arataki Itto's E doesn't really generate particles until it, like, explodes, I think. Meanwhile, like, Xiao, he has, like, 2 charges and he generates tons of particles. So basically, that first E cast is going to sap the energy, but you regain it back with casting his E's again. So it really only works on Xiao in that sense. A set that works on him is the Husk of Opulent Dreams, and now this one's 4-piece basically gives you that extra stacks of Geo damage and defense, so it's going to be really good. You get like 24% Geo damage, and then like I think 30-something%, I think you get like 30% defense, and then the 2-piece of this also gives you like 30% defense as well. So this is definitely his best in slot, there's no question about it. Definitely use this set on Arataki Itto. Okay, in terms of characters actually used with his team comp, there's like several that I would recommend. Like I'd recommend like a full Geo team comp, something like that. Like Ningguang is pretty good actually as like a burst DPS, basically creating energy particles. Although if you have like a Zhongli, I would use Zhongli instead of that. Or Albedo. Albedo is a very good character as well as a sub DPS. Basically just any like sub DPS type of character. Bennett I would definitely recommend, basically just increasing your Arataki Itto's damage, you know. Generally, just sticking to Geo characters is going to be a pretty good bet. Geo Traveler might be a pretty decent option as a support as well. Like, I haven't really looked too much at him, but like his Wake of Earth, basically, if you have him at Constellation 6, which I think you probably would, it basically is gonna give you that extra like crit rate, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, like you get 10% crit rate. Plus it makes these extra structures, so if you have like Zhongli, you're gonna be getting all of that extra like Zhongli damage with some of these structures as well. Could end up being pretty interesting. But basically my tips for Arataki Itto is like build him for defense, because that's basically his strong suit. Attack percent is still pretty good on him. He's a very well designed character, I feel, in terms of his actual like viability with like multiple different builds and that kind of stuff. Although like Husk of Opulent Dreams is definitely best in slots, so farm out one of those sets is pretty much what I can recommend to you all. But anyway, it's been me, Arctic. We'll see you guys next time. Farewell.